plan to bring in revenue. But Liz is on the line. Good morning, Liz. How are you?
Fine, thanks.
What's your question this morning?
Well, hi, David.
Hi, Liz.
This is a two-part question regarding one of your platforms about healthy environment. And, you know, upcoming is the November UN Paris Conference on climate change.
Right.
So I'd like to know, what is the NDP plan to take on climate change, given that people are saying we need to leave the vast majority of fossil fuels on the ground to stay below that 2 degrees, which could be, you know, a huge impact on Canada. So what would you be doing at that level? And then locally, what could be done to bring about a change from fossil fuels to renewable energy?
Well, the NDP are wanting to put a price on carbon, and it's far past the due date when we should have been doing that. Put a price on carbon and you will find emissions will start to go down. I'm not sure that I agree with Linda McQuaig in saying that the oil should be left in the ground. Who am I? Who are we to tell a province that they can't use their resources for their economic benefit? However, I think that the NDP in Alberta is on the right track, because they will be putting a price on carbon, they will be raising corporate taxes, and they will be raising the royalty rates that corporations have to pay the government on this. The Canadian government doesn't get royalty rates. The federal government has only relied on taxes from the oil sands and other resource extractors, and of course when commodity prices go down, as they have in the oil, then those taxes go down, that revenue goes down. So put a price on carbon, encourage technologies and businesses to in ways of reducing emissions, go into invest in innovative renewable energies. And in this area, I don't like the way that the Ontario government has run out their clean energy plan. I don't like the way that wind farms are being foisted on people. There should be, democracy is all about people, right? And here we have governments that are not talking to the people before they do things. So let's do that. But let's look at solar energy. There's all kinds of solar arrays now. Farmers are using them, and then they're feeding that energy back into the grid. Climate is changing. I'm not sure we can stop it in its tracks, but we can adapt as well as trying to slow it down. And I think solar is probably not a bad way of going.
Liz, what's your second question?
Oh, I did both.
Okay.
It was local and federal. So thanks, David.
I appreciate that. Vernon, good morning. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Good morning.
What's your question?
I have a question based around fiduciary obligation. David, I realize that the NDP government or party policy has been structured that it would be a little different than what the PC policy has been put in place for First Nations people. We do know and we realize that there is a lot of underlying Aboriginal right interest within the whole riding, and when there are developments that are to take place, a lot of ignorance in the past has taken place with First Nations, and so a different process has really been lined up in terms of how we do business with the area from the First Nations perspective. Now, in terms of the party and recognizing the overall, we'll say, resolving the issues throughout the riding, what has the party discussed and what's the party put in place in terms of the policy that you've developed to deal with First Nations in all aspects?
Mm-hmm. Aniyugima, Anishna, Miigwech for the question. The NDP, I think, again, would do business with First Nations differently than the other two parties. We've made a clear commitment to recognize nation-to-nation negotiations on projects that impact on your rights and claims, and in fact, the government is legally obliged to do that. When the Supreme Court handed down their decisions in Haida Taku back in 2004, they made it very clear that the government has, for the honor of the Crown, an obligation to sit down and consult with First Nations when those projects first come to its attention. And the Supreme Court is also very clear that when those concerns are accommodated, that leads to reconciliation. So they saw that process as one of reconciliation, and I do too. And so does the party. That's why we would commit to talking to the people who hold the treaties and making sure that they are consulted about projects that are occurring in their area and that they have a say in the environmental assessment of those projects. We would have, I think, go a little bit further. The Royal Commission on Aboriginal People has been stuck on the shelf ever since the Liberal era, and it needs to be taken down, dusted off, and gone through with a fine-tooth comb to see what we can implement and what needs to be done. I firmly believe that if we had taken that down and dusted it off and looked at it a long time ago, we would not be in the same situation we are with First Nations. Clearly, the relationship is broken. We have the ability to fix it, and we have the tools to fix it. All we need is the political will. Let me go a bit further. The Kelowna Accord that the Liberals like to talk about is not an agreement between First Nations who hold the treaties and the government. It's an agreement between the regional chiefs of the AFN who were perhaps elected by other chiefs, but they do not hold the treaties. Our agreement is with First Nations people who hold the treaties. That's our relationship, and we have not done very well in that relationship. We can do better, and the NDP, I think, will.
Vernon, thanks for the call. Florence, good morning. What's your question this morning for David McLaren?
My concern is in regards to health care. I think there needs to be. It mostly is our problem in the province of Ontario, and I think we've cut it in so many different areas. You know, we've got so many different programs going that we don't have much going. People are not getting the care that they got 20 years ago. Another concern is about the wage, the minimum wage. I mean, there's an awful lot of people making $11 an hour and running 2 or 3 jobs to exist.
So both issues are provincial issues, David. How would you, if you were elected into a federal government, get involved in those issues?
Again, we talk to people. Mr. Harper is almost notorious now for not wanting to talk to the premiers, and yet he is a major partner in the healthcare system, and he should be talking with the premiers about this very important issue. It's so frustrating, actually, for the NDP, because we see the Liberals cut back 40% on social spending back in the 1990s, trying to make it up with the health accord, and then the Conservatives coming along and now wanting to cut another $36 billion out of the healthcare program. The only thing that it'll drive healthcare and people's health and well-being into the dirt, and it will open up avenues for private industry to come in and try to pick up the pieces, which is not a good idea. All we have to do is look south of the border to see the mess that's down there. There are several programs, yes, running out of healthcare, and that's one of the reasons. That's one of the places where the federal government should have a role in discussion with the provinces. You know, how can we make it more efficient? Why don't we have a drug buying program that is done by all of the provinces together in order to bring down the price? We know that if the TPP is signed and comes in before we get into power, we know we're going to be dealing with higher drug prices because the patents for the big companies are going to last longer, and we're not going to be able to get to generic products quite as quickly. So there are pressures already on the horizon that are over and above what we can do. So there are things within a system. You know, I worked with the Ministry of Health back in the day, and I helped set up district health councils in the various regions, and they were able to discover some efficiencies, but they were very well attuned to each of the area because they were small. Grey Bruce, for example, had its own district health council. So local management of local health care, I think, is not a bad idea, but there are efficiencies that you can even gain there. For example, when I was working in the ministry, there was a lot of talk about nurse practitioners. nurse practitioners are a good idea, and they're very well equipped to deal with many of the things that doctors do now, and especially in rural areas like this, I think nurse practitioners are something that we should be looking at even more.
So you feel by opening up the lines of communication with the province, you can achieve greater health care and you can achieve a higher minimum wage?
Well, first of all, stop cutting back when we're beginning to need health care the most. Second of all, let's find more efficiencies in the system. And although I do remember talking to some of the top doctors in Toronto, and they're already quite efficient. But we can do things differently. And one of the major drivers of healthcare costs, of course, is drugs. Surely we can at least come up with a universal or a Canada-wide program to purchase drugs at a reduced rate.
We've got to take a break. Coming up next, more calls for David McLaren as we continue with our federal election program on the Open Line on 560 CFOS.